Have you ever imagined what it would be like to steal something from the bottom of the ocean, 3 miles deep, in complete secrecy, while your enemy watches you the entire time? Imagine standing on the deck of a massive ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The year is 1974. Soviet vessels circle around you like sharks, their crews watching your every move through binoculars. They think you're mining rocks from the seafloor. They have no idea that beneath your ship, suspended on a steel thread thinner than your arm, dangling deeper than the height of Mount Fuji, is a mechanical claw clutching the most valuable intelligence prize of the Cold War, a nuclear-armed Soviet submarine. And you are about to pull it up from the abyss, right under their noses. This is not science fiction. This is not a Hollywood thriller. This actually happened. And what makes it even more mind-blowing is that the entire operation was disguised as a commercial mining venture by one of America's most eccentric billionaires. The truth is so outrageous that when it finally leaked to the press, most people thought it was a conspiracy theory. But it was real. Every single detail. And today you are going to discover exactly how the CIA pulled off what they still call one of the greatest intelligence operations in history. A mission so complex, so expensive, and so technically impossible that it changed the rules of espionage forever. Welcome to the story of Project Azorian. On March 8th, 1968, at precisely 11:59 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, something catastrophic happened in the North Pacific Ocean. The Soviet Golf II class ballistic missile submarine K-129, pennant number 7 and 22, was operating approximately 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii, when acoustic sensors buried deep on the ocean floor recorded a series of violent explosions. The submarine, carrying 98 sailors and 3 SSN-4 Serb nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles capable of incinerating entire American cities, disappeared from Soviet naval communications. No distress signal was ever transmitted. No emergency buoys were deployed. The crew never had a chance to cry for help. Within seconds, the massive vessel plunged through 6,500 feet of black water and slammed into the abyssal plain of the Pacific, breaking apart on impact in a catastrophic implosion that obliterated most of its internal structure. The clock in the forward torpedo room froze at the moment of disaster, forever marking the instant when 98 men died in one of the most mysterious submarine losses of the Cold War. K-129 was not just any submarine. She was one of 6 Project 629 strategic ballistic missile submarines assigned to the 15th Submarine Squadron based at Rybachi Naval Base near Petropavlovsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula. Her mission was to patrol the North Pacific as part of the Soviet Union's nuclear deterrent force, a seaborne arsenal ready to launch Armageddon if the Americans ever struck first. The submarine measured 320 feet long, displaced 2,350 tons, and when submerged could cruise at 12 knots powered by 3 diesel-electric engines. But her real power came from the 3 missile tubes mounted in her conning tower sail, each containing a single-stage liquid-fueled R-21 missile with an 800-kiloton nuclear warhead. These were city killers, strategic weapons designed for one purpose only: to vaporize American population centers in the opening minutes of World War III. The circumstances surrounding K-129's final deployment were unusual from the start, and these anomalies would fuel conspiracy theories for decades. Theories that range from plausible mechanical failure to wild speculation about rogue KGB operatives attempting to start World War III. The submarine had been in port undergoing routine maintenance and crew rotation when Soviet Naval Central Command suddenly issued urgent orders on February 9, 1968 for immediate redeployment by February 24th. This directive was highly irregular. Ballistic missile submarines typically followed carefully planned deployment schedules with adequate time for maintenance, crew training, and mission preparation. But K-129 was given only 11 days to prepare for a combat patrol, an unusually compressed timeline that left the crew scrambling. Even more suspicious, the standard crew complement of 83 men was increased to 98 sailors for this particular mission. Among these additional personnel were 10 sailors with specialized training, but absolutely no sea duty experience, men who had never served aboard a submarine during actual operations. The roles of these extra men were never officially documented in Soviet naval records. Years later, when Russian officials finally began discussing K-129, they could not or would not explain why these additional crew members were aboard or what their specific mission parameters were. The submarine departed Rybachi Naval Base on February 24, 1968, under the command of Captain First Rank Vladimir Kobzar, a veteran officer with extensive submarine experience and a reputation as a competent by-the-book commander. Initial radio communications described the patrol as proceeding normally. K-129 conducted a standard test dive in deep water to verify all systems were functioning properly. She surfaced to transmit confirmation to fleet headquarters that the boat was operationally ready. Then she set course eastward toward her assigned patrol station somewhere in the North Pacific northeast of Hawaii. Standard operating procedures required the submarine to make routine radio check-ins when crossing the 180th meridian, the international dateline, and again upon reaching her designated patrol area. Soviet ballistic missile submarines on patrol maintained strict radio schedules, brief encrypted burst transmissions that confirmed the boat's position and operational status without revealing enough information for Western direction finding systems to establish an accurate location. These communications were essential for command and control. If a submarine missed a scheduled transmission, fleet headquarters would attempt to contact the boat on alternate frequencies. If multiple transmissions were missed, search and rescue operations would be initiated because a submarine's silence usually meant disaster. K-129 never made those scheduled check-ins. The last confirmed communication from the submarine was shortly after departure from Kamchatka. Then silence. By early March, Pacific Fleet commanders in Petropavlovsk began sending priority messages on multiple frequencies, attempting to raise K-129. No response. Emergency protocols were activated. By March 17th, more than 2 weeks after the submarine's last confirmed position, the boat was officially declared missing with all hands. Soviet naval doctrine presumed that a submarine which failed to respond to multiple communication attempts over extended periods had suffered a catastrophic loss. What followed was one of the most extensive naval search and rescue operations in Soviet maritime history, a desperate attempt to locate any trace of K-129, any debris field, any oil slick, any emergency buoys, any sign of what had happened. The Soviet Navy deployed dozens of surface ships, submarines, and long-range maritime patrol aircraft to comb thousands of square miles of the North Pacific Ocean. The search operation focused on areas associated with Gulf II class ballistic missile submarine patrol routes based on the boat's last known heading and estimated speed. But the Soviets faced a critical disadvantage. They had no sophisticated underwater acoustic monitoring network comparable to the American SOSUS system. Soviet search vessels were essentially looking for a submarine somewhere in millions of square miles of open ocean without any reliable data about where K-129 had actually been when disaster struck. They searched for weeks, deploying sonar, dragging detection equipment, analyzing ocean currents that might have carried debris, interviewing other Soviet submarine crews who had been operating in the general area during the relevant time period. Nothing. After exhausting their search capabilities and finding no trace of the submarine, the Soviet Pacific Fleet reluctantly declared K-129 lost with all hands. For Moscow, this was a devastating strategic blow. An entire Gulf II class strategic ballistic missile submarine had vanished without a trace, taking with it 98 experienced sailors, 3 nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles capable of destroying American cities, extremely sensitive cryptographic equipment including code books and cipher machines, advanced sonar systems, and nuclear-armed torpedoes. The intelligence compromise alone was catastrophic, even before considering the human tragedy. Official notifications were sent to the families of the 98 lost crew members. The Soviet government issued standard death benefits and compensation. Memorial services were held at naval installations across the Far East. But the families received no answers about what had actually happened to their loved ones. Soviet authorities could not explain how or why K-129 sank because they genuinely did not know. This vacuum of information spawned numerous theories, some based on legitimate technical analysis, others rooted in Cold War paranoia and conspiracy thinking. The official Soviet Navy hypothesis, the explanation offered to families, and memorialized in internal documents, was that K-129 experienced a catastrophic flooding event while operating in snorkel mode. Diesel-electric submarines must periodically surface or raise a snorkel mast to run their engines and recharge batteries. If the submarine slipped below its safe operating depth while snorkeling, seawater could flood through the snorkel intake at tremendous pressure. Such an event, especially if combined with a mechanical failure or crew error in responding to the emergency, could cause flooding sufficient to overwhelm the boat's pumping capacity and sink her. This explanation was plausible from an engineering standpoint, but many submarine experts did not find it convincing because Gulf Dunlatu-class boats had redundant safety systems specifically designed to prevent snorkel flooding accidents. Alternative theories proliferated. One hypothesis suggested a hydrogen explosion in the battery compartment. Lead-acid batteries used in diesel-electric submarines release explosive hydrogen gas during the charging process. If this gas is not properly vented and accumulates to explosive concentrations, any spark can trigger a devastating blast. American submarine USS Cochino had been lost in 1949 due to exactly such a hydrogen explosion. Imagery of K-129's wreck showed the submarine had broken apart just aft of the sail, precisely at the location of the after-battery compartment. Some analysts believed this was evidence that a battery explosion had been the initiating event, blowing apart the submarine's hull and causing the immediate sinking. Another theory involved the submarine's liquid-fueled R-21 ballistic missiles. These missiles used hypergolic propellants, chemicals that ignite spontaneously when mixed. A leak in a missile tube hatch seal could allow seawater to contact residual propellant, causing a fire and subsequent explosion. The Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-219 was lost in 1986 due to precisely this type of accident, lending credibility to the theory that K-129 might have suffered a similar fate 18 years earlier. The explosion of a missile booster inside the sail would explain the catastrophic damage observed in photographs of the wreck. But the most controversial theory, one that Soviet and later Russian officials clung to with remarkable tenacity despite lack of evidence, was that K-129 had been rammed and sunk by an American attack submarine shadowing her patrol. During the Cold War, it was standard practice for U.S. Navy attack submarines to trail Soviet ballistic missile boats as they departed their home ports and transited to patrol stations. These shadowing operations were extraordinarily dangerous, requiring American submarines to maintain close proximity to Soviet vessels for extended periods, sometimes in challenging sea conditions. Collisions, though rare, did occasionally occur. Soviet officials pointed to circumstantial evidence. The U.S. Navy attack submarine USS Swordfish arrived at the ship repair facility in Yokosuka, Japan, on March 17, 1968, just days after K-129's disappearance, with visible damage to her sail, including a badly bent periscope that shipyard workers had to repair. Soviet intelligence seized on this detail, claiming it proved Swordfish had collided with K-129, fatally damaging the Soviet boat while sustaining only superficial damage herself. American naval officials categorically denied this allegation. They stated that Swordfish's damage was caused by ice impact during surfacing in the Sea of Japan, while conducting classified surveillance operations related to the USS Pueblo crisis, a separate incident where North Korea had seized an American intelligence ship in January 1968. Retired U.S. Admiral William D. Smith later formally informed Russian officials at a joint U.S.-Russia commission investigating Cold War mysteries that Swordfish was nowhere near K-129's location on March 8th, and that no American submarines were within 300 nautical miles of the site where the wreck was eventually found. Despite these denials, conspiracy theories persisted. Some theorists pointed to the 11 extra men aboard K-129, suggesting they were KGB operatives who had commandeered the submarine for a rogue operation, possibly even attempting to launch a nuclear strike against the United States that would be blamed on China, thus starting World War III. This theory, popularized in books like Red Star Rogue by Kenneth Sewell, claimed that K-129's captain, realizing what was happening, deliberately sabotaged the missile launch sequence, causing an internal explosion that destroyed the submarine and killed everyone aboard rather than allowing the rogue attack to proceed. The evidence for this scenario is circumstantial at best, based largely on the unexplained presence of extra crew and the submarine's deviation from her normal patrol route. Most submarine experts dismiss it as Cold War thriller fiction rather than credible analysis. The most likely explanation, supported by acoustic analysis of the sounds recorded by American listening devices, is that K-129 suffered an internal explosion, possibly in the missile section or battery compartment, which caused catastrophic structural failure. The explosion breached the pressure hull. Seawater flooded in at tremendous pressure. Within seconds, the submarine lost buoyancy and plunged toward the ocean floor. As she descended past her crushed depth, the pressure hull imploded in a series of additional catastrophic failures recorded by SOSUS hydrophones as distinct acoustic events. The entire sequence from initial explosion to final resting on the seafloor probably took less than 5 minutes. The crew would have had no time to transmit a distress signal, no time to release emergency buoys, no realistic possibility of escape. It was instant disaster, the nightmare scenario that every submariner fears. By mid-March, Soviet Pacific Fleet commanders grew increasingly alarmed. K-129 had missed multiple scheduled radio contacts. On March 17th, the submarine was officially declared missing. What followed was one of the most extensive naval search operations in Soviet history. The Soviet Navy deployed dozens of surface ships and aircraft to comb thousands of square miles of the North Pacific, focusing on areas associated with Gulf Azorian 202-class patrol routes. But they were searching in the wrong location. The Soviets had no idea that K-129 had deviated hundreds of miles from her expected position. They had no sophisticated underwater listening network to triangulate her last location. After weeks of fruitless searching, the Soviet Union declared the boat lost with all hands. For Moscow, it was a devastating blow. A complete strategic ballistic missile submarine vanished without a trace, taking with it nuclear weapons, cryptographic materials, code books, and the bodies of 98 sailors. The families received official notifications. Compensation was paid. To the world, K-129 became another mystery of the deep, one more submarine claimed by the unforgiving ocean during the dangerous cat and mouse games of the Cold War. But the Americans knew exactly where K-129 was. The United States had been watching the Soviet deployment patterns closely, and when unusual Soviet naval activity erupted in mid-March, the Office of Naval Intelligence immediately suspected a submarine loss. The U.S. possessed something the Soviets did not: SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, a network of underwater hydrophones secretly planted across the ocean floor, specifically designed to track Soviet submarine movements and detect underwater nuclear tests. When analysts were ordered to review acoustic data from March 8th, they found it. Multiple SOSUS stations and Air Force AFTAC acoustic monitoring sites had recorded anomalous signals. Triangulation analysis pinpointed the location to within 5 nautical miles, a site in international waters about 100 to 800 miles northwest of Hawaii, in water approximately 16,500 feet deep. The acoustic signature suggested a catastrophic internal explosion followed by implosion, the telltale sound of a submarine's pressure hull collapsing as it plummeted past its crush depth. The United States now possessed the precise coordinates of a sunken Soviet nuclear ballistic missile submarine loaded with strategic weapons and intelligence gold mines, lying on the bottom of the ocean in international waters where salvage rights were ambiguous at best. The question was not whether to attempt recovery. The question was how. President Richard Nixon received the briefing in 1970. Defense Secretary Melvin Laird and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger jointly proposed what seemed like an impossible plan: secretly recover the submarine wreckage from more than 3 miles beneath the ocean's surface and bring it back to the United States for analysis. The intelligence value was staggering. If successful, American analysts could study Soviet nuclear missile technology, examine their ballistic guidance systems, potentially recover cryptographic equipment and code books that would unlock Soviet naval communications, retrieve nuclear warhead designs, and analyze torpedo and propulsion systems. It would be the greatest intelligence coup imaginable, but it would also be the most technically challenging covert operation ever attempted. No one had ever recovered anything remotely close to this size from anywhere near that depth. The deepest salvage operation on record had been less than 1,000 feet. K-129 was resting at 6,500 feet, more than 3 miles down, in total darkness, under pressure that would crush a human body instantly. The Titanic, by comparison, rested at only 2,500 feet. This was engineering on a scale that had never been attempted, and it had to be done in absolute secrecy, because if the Soviets discovered what the Americans were doing, they could claim the wreck, station ships over the site, or even attempt military interdiction. The diplomatic consequences could escalate Cold War tensions to the breaking point. Nixon approved the mission. The CIA was tasked with leading the operation with support from the Department of Defense. The project received the codename Azorian, and its existence became one of the most closely guarded secrets in American intelligence history. The planning phase alone would take 4 years and consume resources on a scale that rivaled the Manhattan Project. CIA engineers assembled a team of contractors and specialists from Global Marine Development Incorporated, Lockheed Ocean Systems, and numerous other companies sworn to absolute secrecy under national security directives. The central challenge was mechanical. How do you lift a 2,000-ton, 132-foot-long piece of broken submarine from 60 hours, 500 feet of water without the Soviets realizing what you're doing? The engineering team studied dozens of approaches. Some proposals were fantastical, like generating gas on the ocean floor to float the submarine to the surface. Others involved inflatable lift bags or submersible recovery vehicles. But after exhaustive analysis, only one method seemed feasible: build an enormous ship with a giant mechanical claw that could grab the submarine section and lift it using a heavy-duty hydraulic system and miles of steel pipe lowered section by section to the ocean floor. The ship would need a moon pool, a massive opening in its hull floor where the recovered section could be hoisted completely out of view from satellites or surveillance aircraft. The entire recovery would happen underwater, hidden from observation. But an operation of this magnitude could not be kept secret without an elaborate cover story. You cannot simply build a 6-18-foot-long, 50,000-ton ship equipped with a derrick taller than a football field, sail it into the middle of the Pacific, and hover over one spot for months, lowering miles of pipe without attracting attention. The Soviets would immediately become suspicious, naval intelligence agencies would investigate, diplomatic protests would follow, the mission would be compromised before it even began. The CIA needed a plausible civilian explanation for why this enormous vessel would be operating in the middle of nowhere. Someone at the agency proposed a brilliant solution: deep sea mining. In the early 1970s, there was legitimate commercial interest in harvesting manganese nodules from the ocean floor, potato-sized mineral formations rich in manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt. Several companies were researching technologies to mine these nodules from the abyssal plains. If the CIA's ship could be presented as a commercial mining venture, it would provide perfect cover. But who would fund such an outlandish commercial project? Who had enough wealth, enough eccentricity, and enough credibility to make the world believe he was investing hundreds of millions of dollars in an unproven deep sea mining operation? The answer was obvious: Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was the perfect cover story made flesh. In 1970, he was arguably the most famous businessman in America, a billionaire industrialist with a legendary reputation for doing the impossible. He had built the world's largest airplane, the Spruce Goose, a massive wooden flying boat that critics said would never fly. He had set aviation speed records. He had produced Hollywood films. He had designed cutting-edge aircraft for the military. And by 1970, he had become a complete recluse, living on the top floor of the Desert Inn Hotel in Las Vegas, rarely seen in public, surrounded by aides, reportedly suffering from obsessive-compulsive disorder, and addicted to prescription medications. His bizarre behavior only added to his mystique. Hughes was known for pursuing ventures that seemed financially irrational, but technologically fascinating. His companies already held classified contracts with the CIA and Department of Defense for satellite programs and military aircraft development. He came from a mining family, so his interest in deep sea mining made perfect sense. Most importantly, his penchant for absolute secrecy meant that nobody would question why details about his new ship's mission were kept confidential. When CIA officers approached Hughes through intermediaries, he agreed to lend his name and corporate infrastructure to Project Azorian. The cover story was set. The Hughes Glomar Explorer would be a revolutionary deep-sea mining vessel designed to harvest manganese nodules from the Pacific Ocean floor at unprecedented depths. Between 1970 and 1974, the Hughes Glomar Explorer took shape at the Sun shipbuilding yard near Philadelphia, a construction project so ambitious that it pushed American maritime engineering to its absolute limits. The vessel was unlike anything built before, a hybrid between an offshore drilling platform, a heavy lift ship, and a mobile underwater recovery system. The construction project itself became an essential element of the cover story, openly publicized in trade journals and maritime industry publications, with carefully crafted press releases describing Hughes's visionary venture into deep sea mining. Articles detailed the ship's impressive specifications: 618 feet long, 50,000 tons displacement, 116 feet wide at the beam, too massive to fit through the Panama Canal, and requiring a voyage around South America through the Strait of Magellan. The vessel was equipped with the most sophisticated dynamic positioning systems available in 1974, computer-controlled thrusters that could maintain the ship's position within just a few feet, despite powerful ocean currents, 6-foot swells, and shifting winds. This precision was absolutely critical because any significant drift during the lift operation could snap the pipe string or cause the submarine to swing like a pendulum, generating catastrophic loads. The ship featured a massive derrick rising 200 feet above the main deck, similar to an oil drilling rig, but specifically engineered for the unique stresses of deep ocean heavy lift operations. A pipe transfer crane capable of handling the enormous 60-foot pipe sections dominated the working deck. 2 towering docking legs, essentially massive columns that extended deep into the moon pool, provided structural support and guidance for the pipe string during lowering and raising operations. But the most critical feature, the element that made the entire mission possible, was the moon pool itself. This enormous rectangular opening in the ship's center measured approximately 199 feet long and 74 feet wide, large enough to completely contain the recovered submarine section and allow it to be raised entirely inside the ship's hull, where it would be invisible to satellite surveillance, reconnaissance aircraft, or surface vessels. The moon pool featured massive hydraulic doors on its bottom that could open to allow the capture vehicle to descend and close after recovery to seal the submarine inside. The engineering tolerances were microscopic. Everything had to fit precisely. There was no room for error. What the sanitized public articles never mentioned, what even most of the Glomar's crew did not initially know about, was Clementine. The capture vehicle was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, a device that looked like something from a science fiction film but had to function in the harshest environment imaginable. Clementine consisted of a massive structural frame, with 8 articulating steel arms that could extend outward and downward to embrace a cylindrical object like the hull of a submarine. Each arm was equipped with powerful hydraulic actuators capable of exerting tremendous gripping force. The arms had to be strong enough to lift thousands of tons, yet precise enough to position around a fragile wreck, without causing further structural damage that might break the submarine into pieces. Clementine was approximately 60 feet tall and weighed several hundred tons. It was built in complete secrecy at a secure facility under a roof to prevent overhead satellite observation. When construction was complete, Clementine was loaded aboard the Glomar Explorer, not by crane, which would have been visible from space, but by submerging a barge beneath the ship's moon pool, positioning Clementine on the barge, then raising the barge so Clementine lifted into position inside the ship's hull. Soviet surveillance satellites photographing the Glomar during construction never saw the capture vehicle being installed. The ship's heavy lift system represented engineering at the absolute edge of what was possible with 1970s technology. The system was designed to lower and raise 60-foot sections of specially manufactured high-strength steel pipe, each section weighing several tons, connecting them one at a time to create a continuous pipe string that would eventually extend 6,500 feet from the ship to the ocean floor. The mathematics were terrifying. At maximum extension, the pipe string would consist of 275 individual 60-foot sections, creating a slender steel thread more than 3 miles long, supporting the weight of Clementine, plus the weight of the submarine section, plus the hydrodynamic forces exerted by ocean currents flowing past the structure. The tensile loads would be enormous. Any weakness in a single pipe joint, any microscopic fracture in the steel, any miscalculation in the stress analysis could result in catastrophic failure. If the pipe string snapped during the lift, everything below the breakpoint would plummet back to the ocean floor, and the operation would be finished. Engineers calculated stress loads, fatigue factors, and failure probabilities using the most advanced computer modeling available. They tested pipe sections to destruction in laboratories. They analyzed metallurgical properties. They ran simulation after simulation. The conclusion was always the same. The mission was technically feasible, but the margin for error was razor thin. Scientists and engineers worked on problems nobody had ever solved before. They developed methods for preserving paper documents that had been submerged in seawater for 6 years, hoping to recover Soviet code books. They designed camera systems that could function at extreme depths under crushing pressure and in total darkness. They created hydraulic systems capable of operating reliably after being lowered through temperature gradients from warm surface water to near freezing abyssal temperatures. They calculated stress loads, fracture points, and failure probabilities for steel components that would bear loads no comparable equipment had ever experienced. The logistical complexity was staggering. Everything had to work perfectly the first time because there would be no second chances if the Soviets discovered what was happening. While the ship was being built, another crucial phase of Project Azorian was already underway. The U.S. Navy nuclear submarine Halibut, which had been specially configured for deep submergent search operations, was dispatched to locate and photograph the wreck. Halibut spent weeks searching the designated zone using a towed deep-sea camera system called FISH, a 12-foot-long, 2-ton assembly of cameras, strobe lights, and sonar designed to withstand extreme ocean depths. After an intensive visual search, Halibut located K-129's wreckage scattered across the ocean floor. The submarine had broken into 2 main sections. The forward portion, including the bow and sail containing the missile tubes, had separated from the rear section during the violent descent. Halibut spent several more weeks taking over 20,000 high-resolution photographs of every aspect of the wreck. The submarine was lying on its starboard side. The sail was heavily damaged, but potentially intact enough to contain recoverable materials. The bow section showed massive internal destruction consistent with implosion and explosion. The photographs revealed that the forward 2/3 of the submarine, approximately 132 feet of hull, designated as the target object, was the recoverable section containing the most valuable intelligence materials. The missile tubes, torpedo room, code room, and crew quarters. The images were rushed to the National Photographic Interpretation Center at CIA headquarters in Langley. Analysts pored over every frame. They confirmed that at least one nuclear missile appeared intact in its launch tube. Cryptographic equipment was potentially recoverable. The mission was feasible. For the achievement of photographing K-129 at that depth, Halibut received a classified presidential unit citation signed by President Lyndon Johnson. Stop for a second. I need to ask you something that maybe nobody has ever asked before. Have you ever felt that deep restlessness? Like the world they have shown you is just an edited version of reality? Like there is a deeper layer of truth that only some people have access to? I know you feel this because people like us simply cannot accept superficial answers. And I want you to know something. That feeling does not make you paranoid or conspiratorial. It makes you someone who still has the courage to question. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment when you realized that the world of international politics is not what it seems? It could be a news story that did not add up, an event that was explained too conveniently, or simply an intuition you could never quite explain. Write like this. My awakening was when, and complete it with your experience. Your story might be exactly what another person needs to hear to understand they are not alone in this journey of seeking truth. Sometimes, knowing we are not the only ones questioning is already the first step toward finding real answers. Now, let us continue uncovering how this operation really happened. By early 1974, the Hughes Glomar Explorer was ready. The ship departed Long Beach, California in June, ostensibly heading to a mining site in the Pacific. Aboard were approximately 180 crew members, including global marine personnel, Lockheed engineers, and CIA operatives. Most of the crew had been told they were participating in a deep sea mining expedition. Only a small group knew the true mission. The ship sailed south through the Strait of Magellan because it was too wide for the Panama Canal, a journey that itself attracted attention and reinforced the mining cover story. On July 4, 1974, American Independence Day, the The Glomar Explorer arrived at the target coordinates and began positioning operations. Almost immediately, Soviet ships appeared on the horizon. Throughout the operation, at least 2 Soviet vessels maintained surveillance positions within visual range, their crews watching the American ship through telescopes and photographing its activities. The Glomar crew stacked equipment on deck and draped tarps over sections of the ship to prevent aerial observation or helicopter landings. The game of deception had begun. The Soviets were curious, but not alarmed. After all, this was just Howard Hughes' crazy mining ship harvesting rocks from the seafloor. Meanwhile, 3 miles directly beneath the Glomar's hull, K-129 waited in the darkness. The heavy lift operation began in early August. It was one of the most complex engineering feats ever attempted. The ship had to maintain its position within a few feet despite ocean currents, swells, and wind. Using dynamic positioning systems that constantly adjusted propeller thrust, the Glomar held station above the wreck site. The massive derrick began lowering the pipe string, adding 60-foot sections one at a time, each joint carefully connected and pressure tested. The process was agonizingly slow. It took days just to reach the ocean floor. Then Clementine, the capture vehicle, had to be precisely positioned to straddle the submarine section. The wreck was lying at an angle on the seafloor. Clementine's articulating arms, each equipped with hydraulic actuators, had to maneuver around the hull and close around it in a perfect mechanical embrace. Remote cameras transmitted grainy images back to the ship's control room, where engineers watched tensely. After hours of delicate positioning, Clementine's massive claws closed around K-129's hull. The grip was secure. The lift began. Raising the submarine was even more perilous than capturing it. The pipe string was under enormous tension, supporting thousands of tons of weight through 16,500 feet of water. Engineers monitored stress gauges continuously. Any failure in a pipe joint, any fracture in Clementine's structure could send everything plunging back into the abyss. The lift proceeded at a rate of just a few feet per minute. Days passed. The Soviet surveillance ships watched the Glomar hovering motionless over the same spot. Its derrick occasionally moving, pipe sections being handled on deck, but no obvious indication of what was actually happening beneath the waves. The crew maintained the mining charade, operating equipment that appeared consistent with nodule collection. The tension aboard the Glomar was unbearable. Success was so close, then disaster struck. When the submarine section reached approximately 8,000 feet below the surface, roughly halfway up, something failed. Multiple accounts and eyewitness reports indicate that several of Clementine's claw arms fractured and sheared off. The steel arms, manufactured from miraging steel, a material chosen for its extreme strength, were not ductile enough to handle the complex stresses and dynamic loads of the lift. Video evidence captured the horrifying moment. With sickening inevitability, a 100-foot section of K-129, including the sail with the missile tubes and code room, broke free from Clementine's weakened grip and plummeted back toward the ocean floor, tumbling through 3 miles of black water, before smashing into the seabed in a cloud of silt. The mission's most valuable intelligence targets, the nuclear missiles and cryptographic materials, were lost. Only a 38-foot section of the bow remained secured in the capture vehicle's grasp. The Glomar crew, devastated but committed, continued the lift. They brought up what remained. What the CIA recovered from that 38-foot bow section remains partially classified to this day, but some details have been released. The recovered materials included 2 nuclear-armed torpedoes, confirming Soviet torpedo warhead designs. Mechanical components, sonar equipment, and hull samples provided insights into Soviet submarine construction techniques. Importantly, the section also contained the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors. Among the human remains, personal effects, and fragmentary documents, intelligence analysts found enough information to piece together aspects of Soviet naval procedures and submarine operations. But the code room was gone. The missiles were gone. The bulk of the intelligence treasure had fallen back into the depths. Still, CIA leadership declared the operation a success. Project Azorian had demonstrated American technical capabilities in ways that left Soviet intelligence officers stunned when they eventually learned the truth. The U.S. had built a ship capable of reaching the deepest parts of the ocean, had developed recovery systems that actually worked under impossible conditions, and had executed the entire operation under direct Soviet observation without being detected. In September 1974, the 6 Soviet sailors whose bodies were recovered received a formal military burial at sea. The ceremony was conducted with full military honors aboard the Glomar Explorer. The sailors were placed in a steel chamber, draped with a Soviet naval ensign and committed to the Pacific. CIA officers filmed the ceremony. In a gesture of post-Cold War reconciliation, CIA Director Robert Gates personally presented the video to Russian President Boris Yeltsin in October 1992. The footage was eventually shown to the families of the lost crew members, bringing a measure of closure decades after the disaster. It was one of the few moments of genuine humanity in the otherwise shadowy world of espionage. The Glomar Explorer prepared for a second mission to recover the section that had fallen back. Plans were drawn up. The ship was restocked. But fate intervened in the most bizarre way imaginable. In June 1974, just before the first mission sailed, burglars broke into the offices of the Summa Corporation in Los Angeles, one of Howard Hughes' holding companies that served as a front for the Glomar project. The thieves were not spies or foreign agents. They were common criminals looking for valuables. Among the items stolen were documents, and buried in those papers was one memo that mentioned Howard Hughes, the CIA, and the Glomar Explorer. The CIA immediately realized the catastrophic security implications. If that document reached the press, the entire cover story would collapse. The FBI was called in. The Los Angeles Police Department joined the search. The investigation drew attention. By autumn 1974, investigative journalists began hearing rumors about something sensational involving Hughes and the CIA. The cat was creeping out of the bag. Director of Central Intelligence William Colby personally contacted reporters and media executives who had learned fragments of the story, appealing to their patriotism to suppress publication on national security grounds. Remarkably, several agreed. The New York Times reporter Seymour Hersh had uncovered substantial details as early as 1973, but honored Colby's request to keep the story secret. But the silence could not last. On February 7, 1975, the Los Angeles Times published a bombshell article by Jack Nelson with the headline, "Administration Won't Talk About Sub Raised by CIA." The story connected the burglary, Howard Hughes, the CIA, and an operation to recover a Soviet submarine. Other outlets immediately picked up the story. On March 18, 1975, investigative reporter Jack Anderson broke the story wide open on national television, revealing details of Project Azorian to a stunned American public. Anderson's report was filled with inaccuracies. He mistakenly called the operation Project Jennifer, which was actually just the code name for the security compartment, and he quoted anonymous Navy experts who claimed the mission was a waste of taxpayers' money because the submarine contained no real secrets. But the core truth was out. The media frenzy was immediate. Journalists descended on Long Beach, where the Glomar Explorer was docked, preparing for the second mission. The Ford administration found itself in an impossible position. Confirming the operation would validate Soviet suspicions and create a diplomatic nightmare. Denying it would be a lie that could be exposed. Instead, the government issued what has become known in legal and intelligence circles as the Glomar response, a phrase now codified in Freedom of Information Act law. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the operation. By refusing to confirm or deny, the CIA avoided both admission and obvious deception, a legal maneuver that has been used countless times since in response to FOIA requests about classified programs. But the damage was done. By late June 1975, the Soviet Union had assigned a ship to permanently guard the K-129 wreck site. Any attempt at a second recovery mission was now impossible. The White House officially canceled further operations. The Hughes Glomar Explorer's brief covert career was over. The ship's subsequent history is almost as interesting as its clandestine mission. After Project Azorian, the Glomar participated in some experimental manganese nodule mining voyages, ironically making the cover story partially real. Then it was mothballed for over 25 years. In the late 1990s, a petroleum company restored and converted the vessel for deep sea oil drilling and exploration. Renamed the GSF Explorer, the ship is still operational today, drilling for oil in deep water sites around the world. Its incredible Cold War past hidden beneath layers of new equipment and corporate ownership. Very few people working on that ship today have any idea that they are sailing aboard one of the most legendary vessels in intelligence history, a ship that once attempted to steal a submarine from the bottom of the ocean. Project Azorian remains one of the most ambitious and expensive intelligence operations ever conducted. The final cost is estimated at approximately $800 million in 1974 money, equivalent to roughly $5 billion today adjusted for inflation. For comparison, that is nearly the cost of a modern ballistic missile submarine. Critics have argued that the operation was a failure because the most valuable intelligence, the missiles and code room, were lost during the lift. Others point out that even the partial recovery provided significant intelligence value and demonstrated American technological capabilities that had strategic deterrent effects during the Cold War. The Soviet Union learned that the United States possessed the ability to reach anywhere in the ocean, recover anything, and do so under their very noses without detection. That capability alone had profound implications for underwater operations, submarine warfare, and signals intelligence throughout the remainder of the Cold War. The operation advanced deep ocean engineering in ways that benefited civilian industries. Techniques developed for Project Azorian directly contributed to the growth of deepwater oil drilling, undersea cable laying, and marine salvage technologies. The dynamic positioning systems, heavy lift capabilities, and deepwater manipulation technologies pioneered for the Glomar Explorer became foundational for an entire industry. In that sense, Project Azorian's legacy extends far beyond the intelligence community. But perhaps the most important lesson of Project Azorian is what it reveals about the hidden machinery of state power during the Cold War. This operation required the coordination of multiple government agencies, dozens of private contractors, hundreds of personnel sworn to secrecy, the cooperation of one of America's most famous billionaires, the construction of one of the largest ships ever built, and the execution of engineering feats that pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible. All of this happened in complete secrecy for years. The public had no idea. Congress had limited knowledge. Even most people within the CIA were not cleared for information about Azorian. It was a compartmentalized black program that consumed enormous resources and carried significant risks, both technical and diplomatic. And it is just one operation. One mission among countless others that we will never know about because they remain classified. Think about what that means. If the United States could build a giant ship, disguise it as a mining vessel, sail it into the Pacific Ocean, hover over a specific spot for months, lower a claw 3 miles down, grab a Soviet submarine, and lift it halfway to the surface, all while being watched by Soviet surveillance ships who had no idea what was really happening. What else has been done that we do not know about? What other operations are happening right now, disguised as something mundane involving technologies and capabilities that seem impossible, executed by agencies that officially do not confirm or deny their existence? Project Azorian is not unique because it was ambitious. It is unique because we found out about it. The Glomar response. We can neither confirm nor deny has become a standard legal phrase because there are thousands of operations that intelligence agencies refuse to discuss. Some of those operations were probably more successful than Azorian. Some were probably more expensive. Some probably failed catastrophically. We will never know because the documents remain sealed, the participants remain silent, and the official position is neither confirmation nor denial. This is the world we actually live in, not the world of press releases and diplomatic statements and official narratives. The real world, the one where nations spend billions of dollars on operations so secret that their existence is debatable, where eccentric billionaires lend their names to covert missions, where ships are built with hidden purposes, where submarines full of nuclear weapons rest on the ocean floor, while intelligence agencies photograph them and plan heists that sound like science fiction. The Cold War is supposedly over, but the game continues. The technologies have advanced. The budgets have grown. The capabilities are beyond what most people can imagine. And just like in 1974, when the Glomar Explorer sat above K-129 while Soviet ships watched without understanding, most of the world has no idea what is really happening beneath the surface of international relations. If you made it this far, it is because, like me, you are fascinated by the secrets that governments prefer to keep hidden. And look, this is not just curiosity. It is a need to understand the real world behind the official curtain. I created this channel exactly for people like you who feel they deserve to know the truth about how power really works. Here you will find stories that never make it to the news, operations that have been erased from official records, and deep analysis of the methods that shape our geopolitical reality. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every week I bring exclusive investigations about the world of international intelligence. And look, this is not just entertainment. It is knowledge that will change your perspective on world politics forever. Come join this community of people who are not satisfied with superficial versions of the facts. Liking the video also helps the channel grow and continue bringing this content that you cannot find anywhere else. Until the next revelation,